Yeah, Angela, thank you. So I actually have a short written paper, which I'll try to deliver in 20 minutes. And the title, as Angeline told you, is The Ghost in the Twittering Machine. So I'll try to sort of go through it within my designated time. Now, most of my data would actually be artworks, and that's the first one. So I want to start with a love letter, which is what you see on the screen now. And since it's a letter by Kafka, it will be an unusual letter, but also one that will serve as a kind of precocious introduction to the problem of the digital humanities. Written kisses don't reach their destination, Kafka writes, because the ghosts that haunt the media feed on them and drink them up on the way. To counteract the ghosts, humanity invents new means of transport to bring people together, like trains, cars, and planes. But it's no use, Kafka adds, because the ghosts have a more effective series of inventions on their side. After the postal service, they have the telegraph, telephone, radiograph, and we might add for today, the internet and Zoom. The ghosts won't starve, he concludes, but we will perish. So what begins as a whimsical love letter turns into a horror story about hungry ghosts. So if we could fast forward a bit, so then we can see the next, yeah, there we go. Now in 1922, the same year as Kafka's letter to Milena, Paul Klee paints this painting called The Twittering Machine. Like so much in Klee, the work first strikes us as cute and inconsequential until detail after detail reveal how acute and uncanny it is. Klee painted it using the old transfer technique and watercolors. The random smudges that result from the technique and watercolors give the work, which shows four chirping birds, an initial air of naturalness and spontaneity. However, the picture quickly grows more sinister as we notice that the birds are awkwardly perched on a wire, that weird objects are coming out of their mouths, and that one end of the wire is attached to a hand crank. When a crank is turned, the birds will presumably move up and down and twitter, all spontaneity lost. Klee's cute birds begin to resemble the menacing creatures in Alfred Hitchcock's film, The Birds. But there is more. At the bottom of the painting is a rectangular area, I hope you can see it, of pink and white smudges. Can it be read as a hole or pit where victims of the twittering machine fall into? Like Kafka's letter, Klee's painting is a mixture of cuteness and horror with nature superposed on machinery. Now, consider now a third conjuncture that brings us closer in time to present concerns. When Twitter was introduced, its creators did not have Klee's painting in mind. For them, the tweeting of birds suggested perfectly a product the market was ready for, namely the tweets as a short burst of inconsequential information. Those who tweet would know what this is. The logo for Twitter, as we know, is a bird colored sky blue, because a bird is free to go wherever it likes and tweet whatever it likes, however inconsequential. Moreover, the more inconsequential the message, the more it becomes an expression of personal freedom, democracy, and anti-elitism. It doesn't matter that ethologists tell us that birds twittering on trees is comparable to dogs pissing on the ground, that both singing and pissing use waste matter, breath on the one hand, urine on the other, to mark territory. Now, this fact is just something boring. A boring fact, boring because fact restricts you from saying whatever you like. Hence, it should be noted, however, it should be noted that inconsequential information can have very weighty consequences. It blurs the difference between the factual and the factitious, information and misinformation. And as a result, we are living through the nihilistic moment of media history marked by fake news and post-truth. And the irony is that this new dark ages has been largely brought about by advanced media, advanced digital media. Now, this leads us to another question many people are asking. I think one that David also began with yesterday. Why is it that the country that sees itself as the freest, most democratic, and technologically advanced is so hopelessly inept at dealing with the coronavirus? This brings us, I believe, to the digital humanities, because this is the kind of question it should be asking and trying to answer. It is not a question of digitalizing the humanities or training in the use of computers. The key question, it seems to me, of the digital humanities is imagining the future of literacy, what literacy would mean in future. Now, let me try to explain with a famous example. In the early modern period, some members of the Bauhaus, in their missionary zeal, declared that the illiterate of the future are not those who can't read or write, but those who don't know how to take a photograph. But Walter Benjamin, while largely agreeing with this, also asked the following question: but must not a photographer who cannot read his own pictures be no less accounted and illiterate? This suggests that the key problem of literacy in the future is not the lack of expertise, but the growing number in our midst of what we might call educated barbarians or ignorant experts. As for fake news and post-truth, the literacy of the future will not take the high moral ground and simply dismiss them as nonsensical or immoral. You can't do that, because it is clear that they are consequences of digital culture itself, where information and disinformation are deeply entangled like parasites and hosts. The first step towards fake news was taken when signs of the real were substituted for the real itself. This is, we remember Jean Baudrillard's theory of consumption, where consumption has become the consumption of science in a system of science that has its own perverse logic and autonomy. One current bizarre example of consumption of science is the American political rights refusal against all medical advice to wear face masks, because they see the mandatory wearing of face masks as a sign of their individual rights and freedoms being violated, and which is tantamount to say it's a descent into socialism. And by socialism, they just mean a lack of freedom. Hence, the refusal becomes, as it were, a kind of patriotic defense of America, in spite of a drastic increase in the number of deaths, right? It's still a defense of America. But it's not so much a defense of the original and challenging ideas of freedom and democracy in America as a kind of junk food version of America, resulting from a short burst of inconsequential information that produces an instant high. It is not accidental, of course, that the US president is fond of both junk food and tweeting. Tracing the trajectory from fake news to disinformation to the consumption of science and junk food, and then back to Twitter, is more instructive, it seems to me, than indulging in righteous indignation over fake news and post-truth that gets us nowhere. For one thing, it allows us to see that what the pandemic represents is a new and unprecedented crisis of the real, beyond what postmodernism imagined. A crisis perpetrated by the intrusion or return of something natural, a virus, into a culture overdosed, OD'd on a diet of science. The traumatic return of a real whose weirdness we cannot handle. This is another way of saying that the ghost in the twittering machine is quite different from the older notion of the ghost in the machine. The latter may be understood as dead ideas that live on in us like ghosts, still influencing our lives. By contrast, the ghost in the twittering machine refers to new ideas or experience imperfectly understood, like ghosts, as it were, not yet born. For example, the quantum physics that make possible our computing machines is said to be capable of explaining many aspects of our physical world. But it is also said that no one understands these explanations, not even the researchers who created them, simply because the explanations are so weird. These new ghosts in the twittering machine are blood relatives of the ghosts that drank up Kafka's written kisses. Almost a century after Kafka and Clay, these new ghosts can be encountered again in the films of Bong Joon-ho. We only have time to make a few quick points about his best known and latest film, Parasite. The title may have misdirected many viewers to see it as a story of class conflict, of rich and poor as parasitic in different ways on each other. But this overlooks one key feature: the absence of any of the monstrous figures found in Bong's earlier films. Not so much the Godzilla-like creature in Host, one of his early horror movies, or the giant pigs in Okja, destined to be turned into GMO junk food, but rather real monsters like the US military that dump toxic substances into the Han River, and the CEOs of biotech corporations. You don't find any of these in Parasite. Instead, what we find are representatives of the poor, like the housekeeper's husband, emphasizing his profound respect for the house's rich owner, Mr. Park. One of the most effective moments of the film was when this guy shouts out the word respect when he talks about Mr. Park. This contradiction, aporia of respect for what oppresses you, points to the world as a site we can no longer grasp with concepts like class conflict. This site has now turned into a parasite, made up of micro subterranean movements and collisions, a world that cannot be imagined through any one genre, hence the film's use of mixed genres. It begins as social comedy about a family of charming drifters But midway through, it turns into a horror slasher movie. An even more important element is the ghost that appears twice, and also the ghost in our title, near the beginning and end of the narrative. The first time as farce, the second time as tragedy, as if to deliberately reverse Marx's dictum on history as repetition. Remember, Marx said history repeats itself the first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. You see a reversal of this in Parasite. The ghost turns out, 2 minutes. The ghost turns out to be the housekeeper's respectful husband, hiding secretly all the time in the basement. His first accidental appearance sends the son Da Song into convulsions and his mother to seek art therapy for him. This is the farcical part. His second appearance, as we know, which is the denouement of the film, results in pandemonium and multiple deaths, the tragedy part. The ghost then is like a fragment of the real, comparable to the rainstorm, the flooding, the dirt and pollution in the film, or on another register to the pandemic, a real that returns like the pandemic as a parasite that we cannot accommodate. In this respect, the film is like a mirror image of Kafka's novel Metamorphosis, where you remember a man wakes up one morning transformed into a giant insect. In Bong's film, everyone remains the same, but the world has transformed into a dung beetle, a parasite. Thank you.